Everyone for your attention and focus and interactions through this whole day. It's my pleasure now for us to turn to our finale with our keynote speaker, Dr. Sarah Derbew, who is a writer, teacher, and advocate for ancient African studies. She earned her PhD in classics from Yale University and was a junior fellow at the Harvard Society of Fellows. She's currently an assistant professor of classics at Stanford University, affiliated with the Center for Comparative Studies in Race and Ethnicity. In 2022, she published her first book titled Untangling, Blackness in Greek Antiquity with Cambridge University Press. And in this book, she traced the role of Black people in ancient Greek literature and art while critiquing contemporary prejudicial thinking about Greek antiquity. In 2024, she published an article about doublespeak in ancient Greek and modern Ethiopian satire. She has just finished co-editing a volume entitled Classics and Race, a historical reader with Dr. Daniel Orles and Dr. Feroz Fasunya, about to come out next month, imminently, April 2025 with UCL Press. Her current research projects explore the intersections between Greek and African antiquity, focusing on the ancient empire of Aksum. Her expertise also includes teaching courses about Black classics and decolonial African archives in the United States and Kenya. So please join me in welcoming Sarah Derbew with a talk entitled Africa in the Classics Classroom. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hannah. Welcome to everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you again to Dr. Hannah Chulik-Baird for the invitation to speak with you all today. Thank you to the Diff team, to Mitzvah handling all of the logistics on the tech side for the speakers. Thank you to Joe, who is part of Hannah's team, and to Nico as well for moderating. And to the virtual audience, wherever and whenever you are, some of the people I mentioned in this talk are in the Zoom room as well. Thank you for tuning in and for sharing virtual space with me this afternoon. I want to first take a moment to honor those who came before us, the builders of the cities, towns, and countries we call home. I want to state that I'm speaking to you all today from Chicago, the unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations. You can learn more about the Council of the Three Fires at the Gitchigami Museum's website, the first link on this slide. I also recognize the Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, those who lived here for generations, and those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. Furthermore, and I thank the Black Theater Caucus at the Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago for some of this language, I acknowledge that the United States, on which I stand, on which I was born and raised, was built at the often fatal expense of forcefully enslaved Black people. You can see the third link on the slide, unpaidlabor.com, for more information. And for live viewers, Mitzvah will put the links in the chat. For YouTube viewers, it'll be in the description box. I acknowledge those who did not survive the Middle Passage across the Atlantic Ocean, and I acknowledge those who are the direct descendants of the survivors. I acknowledge those who still cannot safely walk down the street or sleep in their beds, and those who are still dying while fighting for liberation. I offer all of these acknowledgements with deep respect and gratitude. It is with respect for community that I continue my presentation. I want to start this talk with two open questions that I'll pose to you all in the audience. First, how old were you when you first learned about Africa? And second, what did you learn about Africa in this first instance? While you take a moment to consider your answers, was it elementary school, college, last week, will it be today? I will share the answers given to me by the esteemed organizers of this conference, Hannah and Joseph. Growing up in Scotland, Hannah wrote to me that she first learned about Africa when she was 5 years old via a song she heard on the radio. Washington, D.C. native Joe, the other organizer of this conference, stated that he learned about Africa when visiting Malawian neighbors when he was 10 years old in Washington, D.C. As for the second question, what did you learn about Africa? Hannah, who grew up in Scotland, said she learned about the 1984 famine in northern Ethiopia via Band-Aid's famous song, Do They Know It's Christmas? In DC, Joseph became intimately familiar with Malawian food after eating dinner at the home of the Hanja Hanjas, his Malawian neighbors. While those of you in the Zoom room continue to reflect on your own early educational experiences with the concept of Africa, what did you learn? When did you learn? I will share my own reflections. As an Ethiopian American, I was always aware of the country my parents were from, thanks to their stories and that of extended family members who also raised me. I have an early memory from when I was maybe 3 years old of running around our apartment, gleefully chanting the alphabet in Amharic, the national language of Ethiopia, at the top of my lungs. You can get an image of what type of child I was, and singing nursery rhymes that my dad had taught me, all in a valiant effort to avoid bedtime. Outside of the home, Africa first appeared in my classroom when I was 12 in a seventh grade history session. We were studying a unit on the transatlantic slave trade, and I remember shuffling uncomfortably in my seat to avoid drawing attention to myself as the only Black person in the classroom. Flash forward to 12th grade when I was 17, I took a fabulous history elective about African studies and learned about Belgium's rapacious destruction of the Congo in Adam Hochschild's gripping book, King Leopold's Ghost. It wasn't until my first year of college, however, when my schooling offered me educational access to Africa that did not involve violent theft. This happened when I began studying the Swahili language and made linguistic discoveries that continue to delight me to this day. Thank you, Mwalimu Shomba. In terms of learning about Africa beyond colonization, it was not until my second year in graduate school that medieval Africa entered the classroom. This occurred in a paleography course at Yale, paleography being the study of the evolution of handwritten scripts. In this class, I learned about the intricate practice of making writing material, parchment, from the skin of goats in Ethiopia. On the slide here, you will see photos from the Hamada Berhan Institute in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where priests and lay worshippers today replicate the ancient practice of producing manuscripts. In this class, as a graduate student, I remember being both surprised and appreciative that my professor had broadened our mental map of the medieval world to include Ethiopia. Dr. Barbara Shaler, you did that. While I had first learned about Ethiopia's manuscript history when visiting Ethiopia, it was a different experience altogether to see it in the American classroom as an object of serious study. All of this is to say, I do not take it as a given that students and scholars in any college or university will discuss Africa in rigorous ways. So I use my position as a classics professor at a well-resourced university to give to my students what I wish I had received more of in my younger years: expansive and creative courses about Africa. At this point, you may be wondering, where does classics fit into this paradigm? As an Ethiopian American scholar working in the discipline of classics, usually used as a shorthand for ancient Roman and Greek cultures, I have scoured ancient Greek and Latin texts to identify any instances of Africa writing back to itself. I take this language of Africa writing back to itself from Evan Wangi, who uses this phrase to promote the multi-directional movement of African literature. Indeed, I recognize the power of the written word to achieve the goal of Africa writing back to itself. I have written about this in Classics and Race, a historical reader, an open access volume co-edited by Daniel Arels, Feroz Visunia, and myself, to be published next month by UCL Press. Mitzvah will put this link into the chat. In this reader, I emphasize the need for plurality in the classics canon, and I promote a restorative model of classics that addresses colonial exploitations of race without being beholden to them. In chapter 1 of this volume, I focus on the vibrant Ethiopian epic, the Kebra Nagast, the Glory of the Kings, crafted by generations of storytellers from the 1st to the 14th century CE. This Ethiopian masterpiece is written in Ge'ez, a Semitic language that is one of the oldest written languages in Africa. Although Greek and Latin sources offer mediated access to Africa, texts such as the Kebra Nagast that I discuss in this volume, Classics and Race, texts such as this allow for the type of self-reflexive writing that Mwangi references. That being said, the self-reflexive work does not stop with the written word. My writing about Africa informs my teaching about Africa, and my teaching about Africa informs my writing. So today, I will not focus on my research, but I will focus on the classroom. a space of dynamic knowledge production that warrants critical inquiry despite its ephemeral state. To be clear, I have also chosen to focus on teaching today because I have attended one too many academic talks in which scholars treat pedagogy as an afterthought, even though teaching is one of our shared commonalities. I am happy to note that Diff does not fall into this category of conferences that overlooks teaching, as was clear in the previous panel with Maya and Caitlin, and as was also clear in the 2022 keynote address at Diff by Dr. Kelly Nguyen, entitled Belonging and Reorienting in and Beyond the Classics Classroom. Mitzvah will place a link to Kelly's talk into the chat. In fact, Kelly's example and ongoing encouragement inspired me to prepare a talk with teaching at its core. In fact, Kelly had a Diff pen when we were at a conference in London last year, and I looked over because I was maybe a little bit distracted at the conference, and I decided I'd like to put in my name to be a part of Diff. Entering the world of the classroom, I will spend the remainder of our time together outlining two courses I co-taught at Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. First, I will discuss the African Archive Beyond Colonization, affectionately known as ABC. This course was offered in the fall of 2021, 2022, and 2023. In the spirit of equity, I will highlight who taught the course, what the learning objectives were, what sorts of assignments and activities students completed, and I will offer a glimpse of the students' final projects. As for the second course, Shifting Frames, I will follow a similar format, focusing on the course leaders, the learning objectives, the course assignments and activities, and final outcomes. Finally, I will invite you all in the audience to consider adopting whatever strategies you find useful into your own classrooms and workspaces. A quick disclaimer before we dive into these courses. When I teach, sometimes I explicitly insert classics into the African classroom, and sometimes I do not. Hence, the title of this talk is Africa in the open parentheses, classics, close parentheses, classroom. The African Archive Beyond Colonization curriculum includes material from the discipline of classics, but the Shifting Frames curriculum does not. This is not a judgment or erasure of classics. Rather, it reinforces my call for bridges, not ladders, between academic disciplines. I was trained to think critically and expansively, so I use my position as educator and researcher to make good on this training. Let us begin with the African Archive Beyond Colonization, or ABC for short. In the fall of 2021, I co-taught ABC with Dr. Denise Lim, who was then a postdoctoral researcher at Stanford University Archaeology Collections. We had dreamt up the course while in graduate school together, and we were thrilled at the opportunity to combine our interests in African literature, African visual culture, classics, sociology, and digital humanities so early in our academic careers. Based on these interests, we selected an array of material from the African continent, including monuments, manuscripts, bodies of water, and trash, all for students to explore as they considered and reconsidered the course's guiding query, what is an African archive? In terms of timeline, our course met twice a week for 90-minute sessions in 2021. The afterlife of the course spanned beyond this initial offering. In 2022 and 2023, I taught the course on my own at Stanford, and this quarter, in 2025, this semester rather, Denise is teaching this course at the New School, where she currently holds the title of Assistant Professor of Black Material and Visual Culture at Parsons School of Design. I had the pleasure of co-leading a class session with her in February of this year. We met at the Metropolitan Museum of Art to examine the Flight into Egypt exhibition, and I'm happy to report the magic is still there. On the slide here, you can see photos of each of the cohorts of ABC from 2021, 2022, and 2023. Students in later iterations of the course know that they are part of a larger genealogy, and some of them build relations and relationships across the years. For instance, one student in the third iteration of the course, ABC 2023, Leah Ernest, was an intern at the Cantor Art Museum at Stanford last summer. Here, she collaborated with students from previous iterations of the class to create a podcast examining some of the course's key themes. The QR code on the slide will take you directly to her podcast, Yes to Students Building on and Building Up the Courses They Take. Leah's podcast foregrounds the ways in which community-based learning was at the heart of this course. Denise and I both recognize the importance of community-based learning in the classroom, and we devised ways to integrate this pedagogy into our course. First, in our initial class session, we asked students to build a list of community agreements. We used the template on the right of the slide to offer potential ideas for items, but the final decision was up to the students. This early demonstration of community-based learning set expectations. Students who chose to remain enrolled in the course quickly learned that we viewed group work as integral to the learning process. Another way we built community was to have students sign up for 15-minute meetings with us during the first week of our term. During these mini office hours, we asked students to share what they were most excited about for the course, and conversely, what they were most concerned about. We also asked them to share any information they thought would be pertinent to their academic success in the course. The student self-disclosures from these meetings helped us learn about and address their academic weaknesses. It also normalized the act of attending office hours for all students, not only those who felt comfortable talking with faculty. In addition to these strategies, we had students complete anonymous midterm evaluations in the middle of the term. This short questionnaire asked students 4 questions. Number 1, which elements of the course they wanted to keep. Number 2, which elements of the course they wanted to leave behind. Number 3, which elements they wanted to add. And number 4, what they can do to be a more engaged student. I thank Stanford Center for Teaching and Learning for this template. In addition to giving students a space to be heard, this activity also invited them to consider the role that they played in their academic success. Also part of our transparent pedagogy practices, in our first class session, Denise and I laid out our learning objectives. By the end of the term, we wanted students to be able to trace interactions between ancient and modern Africa, formulate methods for decolonizing African art and material culture, and participate in cultural heritage management at Stanford University. After our course ended, some ABC students enrolled in Denise's Museum Studies course, in which they collectively curated an exhibition that featured Stanford's artifacts from Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Sudan. The flyer for this exhibition, entitled Reimagining African Borders Through Cultural Objects, is on the right of the slide. To achieve the learning objectives mentioned on the previous slide, to trace, to formulate, to participate, Denise and I reflected on our own experiences as students. We discussed what we admired about our favorite teachers, what frustrated us about our worst favorite teachers, and with these positive and negative examples in mind, we created our assignments. For example, we had both been students in classes where the entire grade for the course hinged on a final assignment. In defiance to this stressful structure, we broke up bigger assignments into smaller chunks and highlighted the importance of progress over perfection. As you can see on the slide, the main assignments were weekly posts and responses to the cultural artifact of the week, which I will discuss in a minute, an artifact selection report in which students chose one African object from Stanford's collections for their final projects, a midterm progress report to share specific resources with students and to prevent procrastination on said final projects, and a final project in which students created a virtual exhibition for one African object from Stanford's collections. This final project doubled as a resource for the university, as many African objects still remain uncatalogued and unlabeled in the university's archaeology collections. To encourage peer learning and self-discovery, we assigned a final reflection assignment in which students shared what they learned from their classmates and from themselves. This snapshot from the syllabus offers insight into the types of assignments students had to complete each week. During week 3, the cultural artifacts of the week were objects depicting Black people in Greek and Roman art. Here, students looked at images from a chapter of The Image of the Black in Western Art, a volume edited by David Beinman and Henry Louis Case Jr. The chapter they examined was by Frank Snowden Jr., a Black classicist who collated hundreds of images of Black people from Greek and Roman antiquity. Students also read a chapter by artist Kamathi Donkor about his sculpture of an African Andromeda, and they watched an optional video from Museums Love about diversity in the museum. As part of our expansionist vision, Denise and I wanted to give our students an opportunity to meet people on the African continent who were doing in practice what we were discussing, not to mention flex our Zoom skills acquired during the pandemic. So we brought many virtual visitors to our classroom. These speakers were people whose works or whose projects our students viewed or read in class. The list included a conservation specialist from Botswana, photographers from Sudan and Namibia, a curator of medieval Africa from New York City, Stanford's African Studies librarian, and Stanford's geospatial specialist. We also organized on-campus field trips to Stanford's Cantor Art Gallery and an artifacts workshop at Stanford University Archaeology Collections. In later iterations of the course, I added a few more trips, one to the David Rumsey Map Center at Stanford, and one to the movies. As you might be able to tell from the picture of some ABC students on the slide here, this is Claire, Wayne, and Hyla Mikael. We went to see Black Panther 2, the film when it came out. That bag on the floor is a bag of leftover food. After watching the movie, we discussed the complicated relationship between Pan-Africanism and colonialism, and we debated whether Wakanda was a useful framework for African liberation. For the final projects of the African Archive Beyond Colonization course, students created a virtual exhibition dedicated to one African object from Stanford's collection. They prepared a short essay describing their object and used different visual aids to enhance the viewer's experience. Their websites are now a resource for current and future students looking for inspiration and guidance. The QR codes on the right of the screen will take you to some of these final projects for ABC 2022 and 2023, the second and third iterations of the course. I am not a tech-savvy person, so I'm inordinately proud of figuring out how to upload these projects and create these QR codes. That being said, if the QR codes expire in the future, or if they don't work now, blame the internet and not me. To offer one example of a final project, ABC 2023 student George Brickrang prepared his final project on the Osanyan staff from Nigeria, an object that Stanford students handled during their artifact workshop visit to the university archaeology collections. As you can see on the slide, he includes a musical prelude of Yoruba songs and follows with information about the object. The QR code on the left will take you to his full virtual exhibition. Remember my comments, if the QR code does not work, it's Google's fault. Building on this momentum of student energy, I will now turn to the second course I want to discuss with you all today, Shifting Frames. Created by African students at Stanford in 2017, this course critically examines commonly accepted perspectives on significant African topics and discussions. Throughout the course, instructors push students to reframe their perspectives, to shift their frames, to do this work in community with fellow thinkers. This journey through diverse terrain is guided by student scholars who bring their own research and real-world examples from various corners of the African continent. From the inception of this course in 2017 to 2023, students worked with Dr. Laura Hubbard, who was then the Associate Director of the Center for African Studies at Stanford. Students worked with her to offer Shifting Frames as a credit-bearing course. Despite my best efforts in 2024, this course lost its credit-bearing status. Nonetheless, this course continued being offered. I was a faculty advisor in 2024, and currently my colleagues Dr. Ayana Fluellen in anthropology and Dr. Khalid Osman in civil engineering are the advisors for the 2025 iteration. In 2024, I had the good fortune of working with a stellar team of student leaders to revive and revamp this African Studies course that is very popular among the African students at Stanford. I worked primarily with 3 students, Michelle Kalu, Roxanne Samda, and Daryl Thompson. Temi Adeyemo was also part of this team in the early stages of preparing this course. As a flyer on the right makes clear, we wanted students to be part of a critical dialogue about African geopolitical and cultural issues. This flyer highlights the community-driven aspect of the course, in that the upper banner features a student-led photo exhibition for Africans and Africanists on campus, and the lower half of the flyer displays a list of students who volunteered to lead a session of Shifting Frames without being offered any compensation or course credit. As a teaching team, the students and I crafted learning objectives for this course that we emphasized in all class sessions. First, we wanted students to trace interactions between contemporary African issues and the Stanford African community. While tracing these interactions, students also gain tools to be better teachers and public speakers. This leads to the second learning objective, for students to develop competency in participatory learning. In other words, we encourage both quiet and talkative students to push themselves in our classroom. We frequently encourage students to identify their participation patterns. We pushed some students to talk more and listen less, and other students to listen more and talk less, whichever applied to them. Our final learning objective, to learn frameworks to inform future impact on the African continent. This objective helped students draw connections between their coursework and their professional or personal interests in Africa. To achieve our learning objectives, we gave numerous assignments to ourselves and our participants. Before class, we on the teaching team, we worked with the Student Scholar of the Week to prepare a 1-hour lecture on a topic of his, her, their choice related to Africa. This open format meant that student scholars could rework a lecture based on their majors or other interests. No level of expertise was required. Instead, we shared ideas and resources with each student scholar as they crafted a coherent, informative, and interactive lecture. Before class, one member of our teaching team prepared a short lecture on our course text, Community as Rebellion, here on the right of the slide by Dr. Lorgia Garcia Peña. Another team member worked on publicity for each class session, and another team member handled all other logistics, including room setup and food. These last few tasks, publicity and food, were especially important to draw students to each session since this was a non-credit bearing course. As for the class session, each session followed the same format, an optional frames before frames dance break 10 minutes before class, during which we played music and warmly greeted people as they entered the classroom. We invited the musically inclined early birds in attendance to add songs to our shared playlist. At the formal start of the session, we began with introductions. Then the teaching team led a short lecture about the course text, Community as Rebellion. Next, the Student Scholar of the Week presented an interactive lecture about a topic in African studies. Afterwards, the teaching team facilitated a large group discussion, closing with an open floor forum in which students announced upcoming African studies events they were organizing on campus. After class, students attended the optional Frames After Frames session, a time when students continued conversations from the course and shared resources over a delicious meal. This was also a time for informal office hours with any faculty present at the session. The casual nature of Frames After Frames, as well as the diverse makeup of the class, this both led to wide-ranging interactions between undergraduates, graduates, faculty, and staff in session. For instance, I witnessed a Zimbabwean graduate student reveling in the fact that she found an undergraduate from her home country, and I saw a student scholar smile shyly while a faculty member complimented her on her poise and knowledge during her lecture. When we hosted visitors from the African Leadership University campuses in Mauritius and Rwanda at one of our sessions, during Frames After Frames, the student entrepreneurs from ALU, the African Leadership University, they quickly pulled up chairs next to their Stanford counterparts and began to talk excitedly about potential startup projects. Working with our teaching team, working with Roxanne, Michelle, and Daryl, the students, scholars of Shifting Frames, developed interactive activities that made the classroom come alive with dynamic, heated debates. A few of these activities are listed on the slide. First, case studies help students actively engage with unfamiliar topics and consider hypothetical scenarios in which there is no one correct answer. For instance, during a lecture on public health, student scholar Ierus from Ethiopia asked students to imagine how they would handle a typhoid outbreak if they were the Minister of Health in Nigeria, for example. During a lecture on feminism in Africa, student scholars Swadi from Cote d'Ivoire and Omotolani from Nigeria created agree-disagree lines in which students rearranged themselves in a line based on whether they agreed or disagreed with controversial statements, such as feminism is not African. During a different lecture on conflict resolution in Africa, student scholar Victor from Rwanda presented Answers in a Hat, an activity in which Victor asked a question about conflict resolution, student wrote answers and put them in a hat, and Victor then pulled out answers and used them to guide class discussion. It is heartening to note some of the final outcomes that Michelle, Roxanne, Daryl, and I achieved working together. On the upper right of the slide, you will see Michelle, and underneath I'm flanked by Roxanne and Daryl. First, we showed ourselves and the university what is possible when hard work, mutual respect, and community come together in the classroom. We all had overlapping academic interests, from African and African American studies to management science and engineering to classics. This diversity of interests were our strength. We could tap into the knowledge base of each team member without leaning solely on our expertise and dismissing what was unfamiliar. As for other final outcomes, we received many awards from Stanford University. Roxanne received an Alumni Association Award for Excellence, and Daryl received the Outstanding Achievement Award and the James W. Lyons Award for Service. I was awarded the Dr. St. Clair Drake Teaching Award. I suspect the Shifting Frame students nominated me for this award, but they are very good at keeping a secret, so the mystery remains. You can drop in the chat if you know who nominated me. On an international level, we developed an ongoing partnership with student entrepreneurs from all over the African continent, thanks to the visitors from the African Leadership University the African Leadership University based in Mauritius and Rwanda. More recently, Roxanne and Daryl joined forces with their colleague AC King to create a new Stanford alumni group, SCASA, Stanford Community of African Scholars and Alumni. And last month, in February 2025, the group got its official status and webpage from Stanford's Alumni Association. This alumni group now has its own iteration of Shifting Frames called Alumni Frames that continues to run. And in fact, their next session will be on April 10th next month. In admiration of this hardworking community, I turn now to the teaching team who shared their final insights on teaching Shifting Frames in 2024. In their own words, Roxanne shared, and I quote, "Through our pedagogic meetings with student scholars, I have honed my ability to receive information and provide constructive analytical feedback. Working in a team has taught me the importance of balancing leadership with active listening. I have developed strong teamwork skills, knowing when to lead and when to support my colleagues." Daryl shared, and I quote, "The discussions at Shifting Frames were very thought-provoking. They have been different from content I would explore in my classes, yet so necessary as they provided me with an opportunity to analyze various topics from the African intellectual perspective. I particularly valued the fact that presentations typically concluded with a window of opportunity for students to engage further with the issues by providing either practical applications for students, a so what moment for students to ponder, or providing resources for students to learn more." Michelle shared, and I quote, "As a team, we have rooted our pedagogy in community learning as a source of joy and intellectual engagement at a university such as ours. I have learned how important it is to make spaces for us where we have otherwise gone unseen and unheard. Shifting Frames has offered me the priceless opportunity to educate and learn about what role I can play in academia as an advocate for those I hold dearest." Having taken you on this virtual journey through 2 courses, I now summarize 3 strategies that I hope all of you in the virtual audience will take with you into your own classrooms or workspaces. I do not know all of you. I do not know your particular context, so please take what is helpful and leave behind what is not. My first suggestion is to place community work at the center of what you do. This has made my classroom a dynamic place in which students push themselves and each other to think critically. Second, adopt a policy of democratic participation. This policy has transformed my students into idea creators rather than mere idea absorbers. By placing them in the role of teacher and giving them feedback on their process, they're not teachers without any guidance. I have witnessed them achieve academic excellence without requiring me to consistently prod them along. Finally, third, and this may be the trickiest suggestion to adopt, be open to feedback. There is no room for big egos in community work. I repeat, there is no room for big egos in community work. This does not mean that students can be disrespectful or lazy. Rather, strategically placed moments of critical reflection have had transformative benefits in my classroom. For example, something as small as 15-minute office hours can build mutual trust that can make for a productive rest of term. I have also found midterm evaluations to be very helpful, especially when I ask students to state what they need from the class and what they can offer. In this way, I promote an ethos of reciprocity in which students see me as a resource and I learn from them as well. Taken as a whole, these three methods have informed the ways that I teach and write. Working alongside like-minded educators whose ethics of care and moral compass are unwavering, I have drawn inspiration from them. My list of shining examples continues to grow. For instance, earlier this month, I was buoyed by Dr. Kelly Nguyen's comments at her Metaclassics lecture at the University of Cincinnati. She distinguished here between anti-classics and anti-racist classics. This distinction is more important than ever in the classroom. As an educator, I am not anti-classics. That is, I do not aim to dismantle disciplines in the name of recreating hierarchies. In fact, shoving classics off of its pedestal in order to instate African studies at the top merely replaces one imbalanced model with another. Rather, as I stated earlier, I seek to build bridges across disciplines, bridges across classics and African studies. Through my teaching and research, I aim to give rigor, respect, and resources to both disciplines. Although this work of giving rigor, respect, and resources can be slow and painstaking, I look to colleagues, some of whom I have mentioned today, some of whom are in the Zoom room. I look to them for renewed energy, joy, and sustainable partnerships. By listening to this talk, you have received an invitation to join me as a colleague in these endeavors from wherever you sit, from wherever you listen. Students and I are waiting to see what you deliver. Thank you.